this sort of traditional form of capitalism, it's that profit and loss sort of, hey, what's in it for me, how to take care of my needs. With inclusive capitalism and triple bottom line accounting, think of this as that with globalization, we've really had sort of a giant highway, and all the big multinationals have been able to sort of roll their way to these huge profits. But mainstream really gets left out. And with a much more localized concept, you can hire people from the community. And we'll get into some of the methodology. But as a micro producer, so you notice it's 1 million gallons or less. Biodiesel itself, much more sustainable, and it's domestic. And so some of our values about sustainability, local production, community, this is something that I think ultimately for us to sort of get us out of this malaise, we will have to sort of do things ourselves. You know, post-World War II, you notice that the number 2 and 3 economies in the world were Germany and Japan, quote unquote the losers of World War II. And what are they great at? They're great at manufacturing. And it's something that we've gotten away from it as a country, is that we don't make things anymore. And even though I'm of Indian descent, I promise you, we can't outsource this. This won't be in Bangalore. Well, I mean, I hope it is in Bangalore eventually. But this is something that our waste we can turn into our own fuel. Also, another thing is, if you notice sort of the logo of the company, it's all sort of also coming from this concept of the 3 circles here, and that where sustainability is, it's where they intersect. You know, the triple bottom line accounting, what you think of is, you think of people, planet, and profit, in that order. And it's really sort of critical, because I think corporate America definitely is not sort of regarded the first 2. And where that meets is where I believe the future will be. So just to give a little background of biodiesel, I think when Rebecca was sort of asking if you had heard of this, well, let's just go through some of the basics, just so at least we're all on the same page. So it burns much, much cleaner, at least 75% cleaner. Some tests show it's even 85% less CO2 emissions. Like I said, it's domestically produced. We want to put this in every community, starting here with the upper Midwest, and then eventually going national and international. And it comes from vegetable oils and fats. So in the industry, we refer to this as yellow grease and animal tallow. So imagine you walk into McDonald's and you order French fries. That cooking oil is the raw material. Other raw materials could be, let's say you go to Gibson's Steakhouse. Those steaks, those cows, the fat on them, that's called tallow. You can take that as well. There are other things you can use as well. Things like ground grease or trap grease. Now that's also would be at the restaurants, but it's really like the muck. Another really innovative sort of thing that we want to bring to market is also used coffee grounds. America loves its coffee. Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, whatnot. But 10 to 20% of that, depending on the type of coffee, you can distill about the oil from that. And then the rest of that biomass, we can turn into compost, which you can use for organic farming. And so it's a win-win for everybody. And the really exciting stuff, which I have to sort of preface that algae is something that, you know, it's in the oceans of the world. Okay, I'll put it this way, is that when you think of alternative energy, anyone who tells you that this is the silver bullet either doesn't know what they're talking about or may not have all the facts. So this is something that will help sort of build that bridge away from fossil fuels. If there's anything that even be remotely close to a silver bullet, it could be algae. And so just for the record, it's something that it's probably still another decade to 15 years away with the R&D. In fact, Exxon put about $600 million into an R&D project about 2 years ago. I believe it's off of San Diego, and they're trying to see just how reliable they can do this and how sustainably they can do this. The preliminary studies are showing that it's still very expensive, about $8 or so a gallon, which for Europeans are like, wow, that's cheap. But that won't fly here in the US. So, but algae is really, really exciting. There's a lot of it. It's something that we'll see. But any questions up to this point on what I've said?
So you're saying algae creates biodiesel fuel?
Yes. In fact, there's a movie called Fuel that really gives a nice sort of visual on this. Back when President Carter was president, back in the 70s, he had put together sort of a group of scientists to sort of study this. And they thought they had kind of figured it out. The project cost about $25 million. President Reagan takes office and puts the kibosh on it, thinking it's a sign of weakness. I don't know how being energy independent is a sign of weakness, but it didn't work out. But it's something that, I think with more R&D, it's something that we may be able to produce several billion gallons a year. Now, that sounds like a lot, but we have a huge appetite. Dare I say, even President Bush said we have an addiction to oil. So it's something that we're going to need to make a lot of this. But it's something that is very exciting. It's something that, when people ask me, where is alternative energy for its maturity? And how much farther do we have to go to really start relying on this, and where I can get this at my local Amoco or BP? I would compare it to, if you look at the IT industry, circa 1985 or maybe at most early 90s. If you remember those days, you didn't have screens that were this thin. Microsoft had just come out with 3.1. Bill Gates was just becoming sort of a national figure, as was Steve Jobs. I'm not even sure they were billionaires yet. They couldn't buy Guatemala at the time. But, we didn't even have color screens yet. The icons were just sort of becoming mainstream. We didn't have the internet yet. I would probably put where alternative energy is in the United States there. Now, if you go to Europe or Asia, there may be at least a decade, if not more, ahead of us, especially Germany. Germany, and Professor Rudolf Diesel invented diesel back in the late 1800s, and they're way ahead of us. And there are several reasons why we're not as far ahead. It's not because of the technology. As Tony and I often have talks, it's because big oil is they like the status quo. After the BP oil spill in the Gulf, there was a $20 billion sort of fine, if you will, or sort of fund that was put together. That $20 billion is like a quarter's worth of profits for a company like that. I mean, it is a drop in the bucket. And it's something that big oil is heavily subsidized. When you look at what a gallon of gas costs, we complain about it being, $3.50 a gallon today? About half of that is given to big oil. So if that was taken away, gasoline in this country would easily be $6 or $7. Has anyone ever been to Europe or lived in Europe? Do you know what gasoline costs there? I mean, I know it's by the liter, but just a rough idea? Now that's per liter, so you multiply that by 4. So we're talking anywhere from $9 to $12 for 1 gallon. You'll notice over in Europe, their transportation is dramatically different than ours. Much more dependent on trains and buses, as well as good old-fashioned legs and bicycles. For someone to own a big SUV over there, I mean, it may be less than 1%. I mean, it's very, very rare. Let me walk you through this sort of diagram, and I have a better chart here of that. This is from the Sierra Club, and it sort of gives you, I think, in a very neat sort of chart, all the key sort of players that we're going. So here's traditional gas.